China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the U.S. market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
When you hear Donald Trump say China wants a deal, it just doesn't know how to go about it. They're proud people. J.D. Vance talks about Chinese peasants. What do you make of their conduct in this respect?
If J.D. Vance thinks that he's dealing with the peasants in China, and I'm proud to be a descendant of the peasants, most of us are descendants of the peasants anyway, that's our tradition. We are farmers before, but now we are one of the leading industrialized economies in the world. So I'm sorry, J.D. Vance doesn't know what he's talking about. And therefore, I don't think there will be China-US dialogue unless the United States changes its attitude towards China. Deal with China as it is, show respect to China, show respect to the Chinese people, and don't try to impose your prejudice and biased view about China or about the rest of the world.
This is by far the most important story for you, because what happens with the United States and China will influence how much money you get and how much money you will keep. And it is a life and death situation. Again, it is not my job to make policy for the Trump administration, but I laid out a pathway where both countries could work together. I did inform President Trump I was going, and yesterday I debriefed him for 30 minutes on the telephone. That was off the record. I cannot tell you what I said, but he got pretty much everything you're going to get, okay, including the columns. And the president listened very intently and asked very good questions, which he always does when I talk to him. And I'm not patronizing anybody. I'm telling you the truth. Anyway, by far the most important thing to the Chinese government is Taiwan, not the tariffs, and not the day-to-day, you violated this, you can't have Chinese students, this is that. Nah, all of that can be taken care of. Taiwan is the big one.
A post regarding your conversation with President Xi. Right. Can you talk about whether or not you feel that trade talks, trade relations are back on track after appearing to be a little bit off track last week?
A little bit off track. It was only the complexity. It's pretty complex stuff. We had a very good conversation with President Xi a little while ago, just before your arrival. In fact, we just hung up and they said, "You're here." I said, "That's pretty good." Two great leaders of the world in a very short period of time. We had a very good talk, and we've straightened out any complexity. It's very complex stuff, and we straightened it out. The agreement was we're going to have Scott and Howard and Jameson will be going and meeting with their top people and continue it forward. But no, I think we have everything. I think we're in very good shape with China and the trade deal. We have a deal with China, as you know, but we were straightening out some of the points having to do mostly with rare earth, magnets, and some other things.
So those reduced trade tariff rates, they remain in effect?
Yeah, we have the deal. I mean, we've had a deal. We announced the deal, and we'll be, I guess you could say, I wouldn't even say finalizing it up, Scott. I would say we have a deal, and we're going to just make sure that everybody understands what the deal is. Okay? We had a really good conversation. By the way, he invited me to China, and I invited him here. We both accepted. So I'll be going there with the First Lady at a certain point, and he'll be coming here, hopefully, with the First Lady of China.
Mr. President, what do you expect from Germany
Go ahead, please.
Did you talk about the Chinese students? Are you allowing them to come to the U.S.?
Chinese students are coming. No problem. No problem.
Okay,
It's our honor to have them, frankly. Look, we want to have foreign students, but we want them to be checked.
The reason why the U.S. China trade negotiations are not optimistic is not simply due to negotiation disagreements, but rather rooted in deep-seated structural contradictions, a shift in the strategic competition landscape, and the complex global and domestic situations both countries currently face. Below is my interpretation of a series of important events that occurred prior to today's U.S.-China trade talk in London. Number 1. Since the initial contact on May 10th, senior trade negotiators from both sides have maintained communication, exchanging positions and demands. During this time, there must have been irreconcilable differences, perhaps significant disagreements on one or more key issues. Neither side was willing to compromise, so the talks stalled. Hence, Besant hinted publicly, hoping for direct intervention by the two leaders. Number 2, at the same time, China dispatched officials, think tanks, and experts to voice firm stances in various settings. The most notable among them was Victor Gao. He was sending a clear message to Trump's team and the rest of the world. China will not yield. If the Trump administration insists on its current path, China will walk away from the negotiation table. Number 3, Bill O'Reilly, the former Fox News host, a well-known conservative political commentator, an American writer and columnist who has never been to China before, suddenly traveled to Beijing several days ago and met with Chinese officials. Clearly, he carried a personal message from Trump, conveying privately that the American president had made certain concessions on sensitive issues. This likely paved the way for the subsequent phone call between Trump and President Xi. The major concession almost certainly involved the Taiwan issue. Don't forget that just 3 weeks ago, Trump himself said that a successful trade deal would benefit peace and reunification across the Taiwan Strait. Number 4, Trump held a public meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz shortly after his phone call with Chinese President Xi. Reporters and Trump himself focused heavily on the progress of the U.S.-China trade talks, while Merz sat silently in the background. Even when asked about Germany, Trump ignored the questions and continued discussing his conversations with Xi. He mentioned rare earths and the issue of Chinese students studying in the U.S., indicating these were two key topics addressed during the call. But they were clearly not the only ones. Trump also mentioned reciprocal state visit invitations. However, this was still not all that was discussed, which I'll elaborate on in point below. Undoubtedly, before the call, U.S. economic indicators released were bleak, particularly the negative GDP growth of 0.2% in the first quarter, and a 23.5% year-on-year increase in bankruptcy filings. Besides rare earths, the U.S. relies on China for 85% of its pharmaceutical raw materials, arguably even more critical than rare earths, as it directly affects people's health and lives. Therefore, Trump, who is neither a strategist nor a rigid ideological conservative, is clearly facing serious real-world challenges. As the old Chinese saying goes, if you lack long-term planning, short-term troubles will soon follow. Number 5. Following the phone call between Trump and Xi, the official Chinese readout issued by the Chinese government was very concise. Aside from a one-sentence newsline, it was later followed by around 500 words summarizing the key points. Most of the language was principled and formal, quoting the ancient Chinese saying, "Keep your word and act accordingly," which clearly reflects the Chinese government's deep distrust towards the U.S. government. The only specific issue explicitly mentioned in the statement was Taiwan. The Chinese release specifically noted that the Trump administration reaffirmed its adherence to the One China policy. Although Trump did not mention this to the press, given standard diplomatic protocols, there must have been video recordings and witnesses present during the official communication. Thus, the credibility of the Chinese account is very high. This detail is crucial. It indicates the U.S. China trade negotiations carry implications beyond economics. First, the competition between the two nations extends beyond the economy. It is a contest of comprehensive national power and ideological worldviews. Second, based on such a structurally complex negotiation backdrop, political willpower and economic issues are tightly interwoven. As the Chinese saying goes, a tug at one thread moves the whole fabric. Taiwan is the cornerstone of Sino-American relations and a red line that could provoke a military response from China. China's declaration of being ready to fight to the end includes the resolve and capability to engage militarily with the U.S. The fact that the Chinese government did not specifically mention other issues of concern to the U.S., such as the tech war, the tariff disputes, in its official readout, further illustrates 5 things as following. First, the Chinese government, taking a long-term view, no longer treats temporary difficulties as the top priority in dealing with the U.S., meaning China is already prepared for the possibility of failed negotiations and even complete decoupling. Second, based on this consideration, China will maintain a firm stance in negotiations and adhere unwaveringly to the principle of equality, mutual benefit, and mutual respect without yielding to the U.S. pressure. Third, anything the U.S. seeks from China, even if it can be offered without harming Chinese interests, will require equivalent U.S. concessions in return. The U.S. can exchange certain strategic political benefits for immediate economic gains from China. Fourth, if U.S. fails to follow through on its commitments, say what you mean and do what you say, China will retaliate, and that retaliation will be painful, even devastating. In the eyes of the Chinese people, the once-in-a-century transformation means that a decisive confrontation is drawing nearer and nearer by the day. Conclusion: U.S.-China trade negotiations are no longer simple economic consultations. They represent a long-term struggle involving comprehensive national strength, strategic endurance, and political determination. In the short term, unless a major external crisis emerges or a sudden shift in motivations for mutual compromise occurs, achieving a substantial breakthrough is unlikely. What we are more likely to see in the future is a pattern of intermittent dialogue, limited easing, and enduring structural conflict. The only thing I would say to all the poor souls engaged in this monumental trade negotiation, good luck, ladies and gentlemen.